Hi, I'm Pastor Havilah Forgy, and this is a presentation made at the Bishop's Convocation in January of 2024 about experimental ministries. I'm very excited to share a few of my experiences with you, so thanks for listening. So, my last big project of experimental ministries was called Adventure Camp. And it was in partnership with Fusion Homeless Shelter in Federal Way, Washington, and with the Federal Way United Methodist and Good Shepherd Episcopal Church, both in Federal Way and Auburn. One pre-registration that we received a few days before the beginning of Adventure Camp, well, it emotionally broke me. It was for a first grader named Draco. In the section which invited parents to tell us anything you'd like us to know about your child, his mom had written, "Must be watched while eating, collects and saves food." Compulsive food hoarding is a response to severe trauma associated with long-term food insecurity and hunger. The brain is changed by brushes with starvation. This little wide-eyed 6-year-old who was quiet and sweet and captured all of our hearts the first day we were there had already figured out that in his life, food available one moment didn't mean there would be food available the next. Our volunteers watched as he carefully cut his first morning pancakes into strips and slid the majority over to the side of his plate. He left 2 strips and began to eat them slowly and methodically. When he was finished and started to grab the rest to put into his pocket, one of his group leaders intervened. "There's lots of pancakes, Draco. Why don't you eat those that you've already cut up? And I'll get you some in a baggie to keep." He didn't quite believe it, and he just waited patiently in his chair until she came back from the kitchen with a big Ziploc bag of pancakes and eyes that were a little redder than when she had walked out. He thanked her and stuffed the pancakes deep into his pockets before eating the rest on his plate and seconds. Lunch was the same, but with spaghetti. One of the leaders went and made him a quick peanut butter and jelly, our planned go-to if any of the kids didn't like the hot meal we had made that day. And again, he ate his fill. The next morning, as the kids drifted in for breakfast, one of the kitchen team came in and scanned the room. When her eyes landed on Draco, she went and made herself small by his chair and looked up at him and offered him a huge handful of granola bars. "These are for later, Draco," she said. "Put them in your pockets." Someone making sure that Draco's pockets were full before every meal became a rhythm of the week. And we watched meal times become a time of happy interaction with other kids and with leaders instead of a time of calculation and concern. And that by itself would have been a miracle. But the last day, during the last activity Draco's group had before lunch, kids were being kids, and they were growing and hungry, and lunch could not come fast enough. "I'm starving," one of the boys said, clutching his stomach and being dramatic. Little Draco lit up like a Christmas tree. "I have granola bars." He shared out his pocketfuls of granola bars among the other kids and was so happy to watch them eat. I don't know what happened to Draco after that week. I pray that his family was able, with Fusion's help, to find stable and permanent housing. Childhood food insecurity will be a lasting trauma for him, and he'll get to process that throughout his life. But for that moment, one shining moment, Draco felt safe enough to share. Food and love were abundant. We had served and fed him knowing we were serving Jesus. And then suddenly he was handing out communion. Take and eat. Jesus, in that child, changed all of us who were in his presence. And that's why I'm always excited to talk about experimental ministries. I love Jesus, and I love his beloved church. I believe in our ability to grow disciples and to grow in discipleship. I think sometimes that overall, as a Lutheran body of Christians, we can be suffering from an institutional depression, and I think it's a result of institutional inward turn. I believe in Jesus' promises of abundant life for us and for our churches. I believe in resurrection. I believe that we can be released from bondage and live in joyful freedom as individuals and as congregations. And in my experience, experimental ministries which focus on serving Christ in the tangible humans where he told us we could find him, encounter him, see and touch and actively love him, are the experiences through which individuals are transformed and whole communities find joy and new life. It's my deepest desire to see that fierce joy in every one of our churches. And that's why I'm here today, talking about this again. At Christ Lutheran Church in Federal Way, Washington, the youngest person that regularly attends worship is 19 years old. She is an anomaly. The next in age is 25, and 2 decades separate them from the next. They are my child, that 25-year-old. This is a source of grief and nostalgia for our older members of the congregation who remember packed children's sermons and vacation Bible schools, but this is a reality, not only of CLC Federal Way, but of many faith communities across denominations. We've watched other congregations with few or no children try to recapture the past and engender hope by holding a VBS on campus. Sometimes this still brings some energy, but other times it seemed to backfire. Low attendance and low congregation engagement seems to have the opposite effect on those who do volunteer and maybe the entire faith community. Feelings of hopelessness, despair, and a greater sense of the impending death of the church that they love. These observations led us at CLC Federal Way to the conclusion that the era of vacation Bible schools where churches were packed with kids who might be going from one VBS to another all summer are over for us. Parents who retain enough, perhaps naive, trust in religious institutions to send their kids for religious instruction with a group of strangers who may or may not be safe also tend not to be interested in mainline churches that proudly display their RIC status and have a female pastor. Those who might be attracted to the values of our churches also tend to be the ones who have seen report after report of abuse of children in religious settings. They will not blithely send their children for a week of VBS in an unfamiliar place. The children would not come to us. But we were and are called to serve children. The answer, go to them. CLC had begun an association with Fusion Transition Housing for homeless families late in 2022 when we collected diapers for them, and then decided that we would take special offerings to support them financially every other month in 2023. In April, we met with their staff about the possibility of doing a VBS with the B for Bible, lived instead of said, for the kids that were there that summer from all different faiths and backgrounds. We were met with enthusiasm and we started to dream. I mentioned the dream at an area clergy meeting. I described the need for it to be a trauma-informed ministry, and Father Josh Hostler of Good Shepherd Episcopal said that a member of his church would be very interested in that aspect. Pastor DJ Del Rosario of Federal Way United Methodists just said, "I want in." Our churches started dreaming big together. Not gonna lie, I encountered some, "This is a nice idea, but we don't have the energy, capacity, or money." But the majority of CLC leadership had the attitude of, "Havla, you're crazy, but let's try." That would be nice, but not something we're able to do, is a response that will probably come up often, especially post-COVID when organizations might still be in the habit of dig-in survival mode. Moving from that can seem more daunting than ever. But humans were not designed for stagnation. When we exercise our bodies or our minds, we have more energy and more vitality, and I think human systems are the same. The more we stay still, the more depleted we are. My deep conviction is that we are called to serve. And when we can encounter Jesus through serving the least in our community, particularly when we can get outside of our usual settings and partner with other people of faith, we find that we do have the capacity. Money emerges to do worthwhile things. And we are given divine energy, which not only sustains us through the ministry at hand, but rejuvenates both individuals and faith communities in every other endeavor. We ended up spending a week at the Fusion Family Center. We served almost 40 kids over the course of the week, some all week, some moved out, some came in, and we ministered to their families as well. We dreamed initially of serving meals not just to the children, but to their families, and we dropped this idea as being too much for our volunteers and our funding. However, we ended up inviting families to join their kids at mealtimes because there seemed to be more food than we thought. In amazing loaves and fishes fashion, there was not only enough breakfast and lunch for kids every day, and families, and volunteers to be satisfied and more. But each meal had cartfuls of leftovers, which were distributed to all the families in the space, even those not involved in adventure camp, to take home for dinner or to freeze for future meals. Still can't explain it. Every volunteer participated in a training for trauma-informed ministry with children where they learned what to expect, how emotional dysregulation surfaced, and how to respond to trauma-induced behaviors with patience, understanding, healthy boundaries, and kindness. Each day had music which centered on community and kindness, opening discussions about feelings, and also had high-energy outdoor games, story time, crafts, and special events with community partners. One of these was a partnership of several churches and 3 area quilting guilds who brought in cut fabric, allowed kids to choose their patterns and color a center patch, then had a quilting bash at Christ Lutheran for 2 days to create personalized quilts for all of the kids. It was incredible. The other was Tacoma Opera, coming in with loads of costumes for the kids to try on and play acting games. We also had a regulation station where kids could go if they became overwhelmed and emotionally dysregulated and spend time with volunteers who were experts in trauma in children. Church and community members who couldn't participate on site because of daytime commitments or mobility issues were invited to take an envelope which contained information about a particular volunteer, Fusion staff member, or participant, and specific ways to pray for them over the course of the week. From my perspective, we did good and faithful work, loving and serving Jesus through serving the children and families at Fusion Homeless Shelter. And that is my church's why. And that is my why as a disciple dedicated to being the hands, feet, heart, and voice of Jesus Christ in the world also. But as a pastor, I have a parallel and maybe deeper why. Experimental ministries help my people encounter Jesus in real ways and grow in discipleship as a result. And this truly happened in tangible ways. The full list of wrap-up questions and answers that show this for my congregation and members of Federal Way UMC and Good Shepherds is available. And if you'd like that, please put a comment on here. I'll get it to you. But what I've experienced in the last few months in my faith community is more cohesion, more small Kairos moment stories where people have noticed God at work in their daily lives and in themselves, and more openness. There's space made at every table, and no circle is closed. Individuals at CLC who encountered Jesus at Fusion Transition Housing are longing to encounter him again in the unsheltered, the hungry, the sick, the imprisoned, and the stranger. That is the important stuff. But because resources are fuel for the important stuff, I think it's important to note that the fuel to continue is strong in worship attendance, willingness to serve whenever there's an additional need expressed in our community, and a significant increase in pledges for 2024 at Christ Lutheran. Success story, right? And that's super fun and gets attention and gets me to talk about it. Yay. But I'd like to read you a little piece of scripture. It's Matthew 13, verses 1 through 9, also known as the parable of the sower. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it, while all the people stood on shore. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it didn't have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow, but when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 100, 60, 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let them hear. For me, this passage is the reality of experimental ministries. A great idea that lands in the wrong place might yield nothing. A great idea that doesn't match the gifts and passions of the people involved might just get eaten up. Some do good things, but just for a moment. And some end up just being wrong-headed ideas. And that's okay. No learning is wasted energy. And some are right place, right time, right people. And God's transformative work is revealed in the world, and we get to be part of it. But the point is that these ministries are not part of something finite that we succeed or fail at in a moment. It's not a football game. Experimental ministries are best carried out with an infinite mindset, where the success is not that we win or lose at any moment, but that we get to keep playing the game, and our faith communities will thrive during and beyond our time there. What I've found over time and creating experimental ministries in several different contexts with different groups of people is that there are some ways to consider seeds, soil, and sunlight, ideas, contexts, and people that make a harvest more likely. And I'd like to share some of those discoveries with you today. My first step is always what I call chasing God, turning your attention to where God is already at work in your community. My bias, and maybe it's yours too, is that wherever love is, wherever restoration and healing are happening for humanity or for creation, God's at work. So you can take some time and brainstorm the places in your church's community where you can see God at work. I love mind maps, and if you don't know what those are, look it up. They're kind of wonderful learning tools, and especially brainstorming rules. Brainstorms can look like lists or mind maps or whatever helps your mind work. In truth, this discovery is an ongoing work of a lifetime, but it starts with one brainstorm. Next, I'd like to refer to Matthew 25, 35, and 36. Certainly a familiar passage. For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. So our next brainstorm is to use that scripture as a roadmap. Let your mind play with who a stranger is, different ways that people who might be imprisoned, and so on. Using that scripture as a roadmap, where is Jesus hiding out in your community? Whether you've paused this recording and done some brainstorming, or we'll do that later, next you can look at your 2 brainstorms and notice a few things. What on either page hits for you? Is there anything that you already feel passionate about? What about for your congregation? I have to tell you, I'm pretty new to the City of Federal Way, but I heard people in my congregation mention Fusion a few times in my first year there before we started partnering with them as a whole church in the second. What in these lists that you've made have you heard about from members of your congregation? Third, take note if any of the places or organizations where you see restorative work is with any of the humans that you see Jesus in your second list. Especially notice if they line up with passion places that are yours or passion places of the members of your church. Maybe you didn't need any brainstorm to tell you who to partner with in your larger community. Maybe you knew right away. But your next step is to go meet with people who run the organizations that perked your interest. If you already do one-on-ones, this is the place for one-on-ones. And if you don't know what those are, that's a great time to look that up too. So go see people, learn stuff. Learn what their organization needs, what their hopes and dreams for the future are, who they serve, how they find them, what they hope happens for these people. Find out their why. Try to do that with as many organizations and people as you can. And again, this is long-term work and something you need to pace throughout your ministry. Our DEM in our Synod, Joey Ager, describes work like this as building Dristane walls, which is a great Scottish image. Some of you might have heard his presentation on that, and it's on YouTube. Go grab it if you haven't. Building a Dristane wall isn't like building with square bricks and mortar to force fit. A Dristane wall is of natural rocks with all their God-given shapes. The builder gets to know each rock, turning it over and over, and then when one matches the contours of the one before, it's placed on the wall. Good leadership in experimental ministries is all about knowing your community, the one inside your church, and their gifts, talents, interests, and passions, as well as their backgrounds, which drive those things, and the one outside your church. When something clicks, start talking. And a word of advice here, invest in your early adapters. If someone isn't interested, you don't need to convince them. Move on. Mention the dream wherever you are, and the results might surprise you. Pastor DJ gave the "I'm in" response the first time I even met him. Partnership with him and with the movers and shakers of his congregation fueled the Fusion Project and continues to fuel that and other experiments. We have a volunteer at Fusion that I met at a Tacoma Opera event, a swanky one. Who knew that she would want to volunteer at a homeless shelter? Talk about what you're planning and dreaming and hoping for, and then make sure you connect with the people that get excited with you. I'm in the middle of leading a cohort right now that we're tackling this whole topic in 12-hour-long sessions, so forgive me, but I'm going to really accelerate of necessity right now. After the dreaming phase, you need to solidify your vision. Take your movers and shakers to the place that you hope to serve. Ask questions, dream about possibilities, and then find your why. It can be pretty simple. Ours was, the children at Fusion are a group that has experienced significant trauma and is rejected in almost every space they find themselves in. Jesus calls us to show them something different, extravagant welcome, acceptance, and love, because they are made in the image of God and are worthy of that love. The planning is the fun part. Get your movers and shakers from your congregations and any that you partner with together. And make sure there's someone in charge of communication and making sure each team is on track. You may have only one team. Our Fusion had 8 big teams. The Agape group I did in California had 3 small ones. Clip Arts in California had 4 plus staff. Theater Camp in Federal Way had 1 team of 3 people. There's a range. But this big picture person is probably you. Your movers and shakers will probably be team leaders. Great. But I found that there are a lot more people that want to work hard than there are people comfortable with making definite decisions. Even if your input is only, that's a great idea, let's run with it, your input is necessary. Be extremely detailed in your planning and note-taking. I like to use a program like Google Keep where I can keep tidbits of information and store them easily. Meeting notes go on Google Docs that any member of the initial movers and shakers team can comment on in case there are things that need to be worked out. However you do it, communication with your team is absolutely key, detailed and frequent. If you haven't read Simon Sinek's Leaders Eat Last, I strongly recommend it. Servant leadership is important. You help your core team feel valued and safe to explore their own gifts and ideas. Once your plan is pretty fleshed out, it's time to recruit volunteers. This is actually fun, not hard, and I know you're going to completely argue with me. Maybe not everyone. But we do tend to do this badly in churches. And sorry, I gotta call them like I see them. Let's talk about what doesn't work well. Newsletter posts, Sunday morning announcements, social media, group texts, posters in the fellowship hall. I'm not saying you shouldn't do all of those things early and often, but they are forgetting the project into the cultural consciousness, not usually forgetting anyone to actually volunteer. Every once in a while, yes, but most of the time, they don't. Case in point, have you ever been in a room of pastors and had the leader say, "Would someone like to close us in prayer?" Usually, crickets. It's awkward. No one moves until someone, maybe even the leader who said it, can't handle the awkward anymore and volunteers. And we're all gifted at this, and we know it. Probably a lot of us love praying. I don't do this at meetings. If I want to pray or read or whatever, I pray. But if I want to encourage wider leadership or know that there's someone in the room who's more gifted for that moment than I am, I'll just say, "So-and-so, will you please begin our time with prayer?" I haven't been told no. Recruiting volunteers for anything, I think, is the same. Specific and personal invitations. First, start with why. Yeah, I'm a broken record with that. I'm asking you to do this because I've seen you, or I think you are gifted at, or even because I was praying about this and asking God for guidance, and then I couldn't stop thinking about you. That has happened to me. Then, number 2, accept any answer. Yes? Celebrate. Gosh, be excited. I'll think about it. Great. I'll bug you next Tuesday and see how your discernment's going. I don't think I'd be good at that, Havla. I think you're being crazy again. Me and God, crazy. Will you think about it? Then refer to number 2. Answer yes. Great. I'll bug you next Tuesday. No way. Well, the response to that depends upon the reasons, but usually I completely get it. Do you mind if I hassle you the next time an opportunity comes around and see if it's a different season? Number 3, don't take any answers personally. Maybe your why, like mine, is growing disciples. The question helps them grow. Success. And trust that God is at work no matter the response. I have a good story about this from Fusion Adventure Camp. You can message me for it if you want. The end step in that story that I will share with you is that someone that didn't want to volunteer at first stopped me after worship the week before the event. And they said, "Your sermon got to me. I want to be in on this. Do you still need help?" And the important part of that story is there was nothing in my sermon that could possibly have moved him that direction. It's always good to be completely clear that it is God transforming people's hearts, not me. In the interest of involving the largest number of people in your congregation and extended family, as I like to call it, call people who have dropped in or have moved away and stay in touch, or even attend another church and have ties to yours, think outside the box for volunteer involvement. If people are shut in, they can pray. If they work during the hours of the event, they can help with preparation. If they're going to be out of town when the thing actually happens, they can solicit donations from area businesses. Disdain walls again. Know your people. Ask them to work in the area of their gifts or where you discern a stretch for them that could help them grow. So here you are. You get to do the thing. Showtime. Know the plan and the why extremely well. So when, not if, when things that are unexpected happen, you still can get to the next plot point and keep your eyes on the why to get back on track. Build in time for prayer and for an end of the day time to talk about where and how people have encountered Jesus. Remind them that everything good comes from God. Don't give yourself a fixed job if you can help it. Leave room for putting out fires or pastoral care needs because they come up. Drift around. Try to notice your people loving and serving in special ways and tell them later. See God at work. Collect sermon illustrations. When it's done, celebrate. Over the course of a year, we tried to do several The Gospel According to special worship services. At the one for Fusion, we invited the shelter staff that we had worked with for the week to be our guests. And each team came up and described their experience, focusing on the church's why of loving and serving Christ through loving and serving these kids and their families. And I also asked them, if they could, to name how they had encountered Jesus in tangible ways and grown in their relationship with Christ. We laughed and had a blast sharing our skits and lessons and songs, and it was a fantastic Sunday and an important closure and framing for the week. This kind of ministry is hard work, but it's good work. There's joy in this work. You'll be exhausted, but not depleted. Whether it's a ministry that's a work of holy chaos with 50 volunteers or an evening of a few participants and a few healing caregivers, God shows up. The Holy Spirit is tangible. Christ is there, and sometimes in the most unexpected way. The experimental ministry moment that continues to sustain me when the hard and exhausting parts come wasn't in one of the large ones with big flashes of light. Not to say those haven't been great. The time when I saw Jesus most clearly was toward the end of a religious trauma ministry group. 6 participants, 6 hosts, 4 meetings on Monday nights with the intention of hearing the ways members of the LGBTQ+ community had been hurt by the church at large, and just saying we were sorry. Weeks 1 and 2, we told more general stories spurred by art and creative projects, but week 3 was for the real hard stories. We listened. Have you ever noticed that religious trauma and sexual abuse seem to often be friends? One of our participants had grown up in one of the Catholic churches in New Jersey that later became newsworthy. And he had been systematically sexually abused by more than one priest in the sanctuary of his church between the ages of 6 and 12. His quiet story was such that I had to quickly learn about secondary trauma for my volunteers and myself. I went home and spent the night throwing up just from hearing a short version. But how he ended his story is what has made all the difference in my life. He said, "I knew from an early age that God didn't exist, because there is no way that God could let what happened to me happen in a church. But now, here, I don't know if that's forever for me. That for me is already not yet resurrection. Jesus so tangible in that room with us, and it was holy, holy, holy. That's all I want for my people. That's all I want for you and for our whole church. To see Jesus, to chase him down, to experience our own resurrections into life and vitality and shalom and joy, because that is what happens when we encounter Christ. That's what happens when we focus on loving and serving him. He told us where to find him. So let's go. Amen. And blessings on your experimental ministries. Thanks for hanging out with me.